Hello and welcome to a special bonus episode of Handed Down. It was absolutely fantastic to be able to interview the Haar recently, talking about their latest album and about the song Wild Rover. The only problem was we had such a great conversation that there was way too much to put into one single episode. So I'm really happy today to share with you the extended conversation that we had towards the end of the podcast around their musical influences and how they came into traditional music and just generally chatting about traditional music. So do enjoy.
My parents and all don't really play music. There's musicians in my family, but basically I started properly playing music when we moved to Laois. So my family is originally from Dublin and my mom's kind of from all over the shop. But basically when I was really young, we moved to Laois and there was a Cultus branch about a 5 minute drive down the road. At the time, no, I'd say 10 minutes. At the time, it was actually in this shed in the back yard of just this really nice couple who gave the place for people to play in basically. And there was one teacher, it was all tin whistles obviously, and that was kind of where I started off. But there was a really strong sense of community in that. And it's funny, I feel like with music, and when you're younger you feel like you're being forced to go do these things. It's such a like trek to be asked. But basically they did some workshop series where other musicians from other areas came to go to the workshops, and they got in bigger named musicians to teach and things like that. And there was a singing workshop that no one had signed up to. So the chair of the Cultus branch, Catherine, she asked me and this other girl if we'd please, sorry, there's a siren there, I don't know if you can hear it, but I'm sorry about that. But basically she asked me and this other girl to sign up to the singing workshop just to get some numbers for it. And I kind of just fell in love with trad songs from there. We did some really random ones as well, that like one called Cottage with the Roses Round the Door, that is still one of my favorites just from that, because it's just so ingrained in my mind. But basically after that I was asked to enter the Fleadh, knowing nothing about singing, and I also hadn't gone to lessons or anything like that, and was absolutely terrified because I'd say, Corey, like anyone at those competitions can be cutthroat even at county level. They're very intense. So I ended up singing these two songs. I can't even remember what they were, but basically they wouldn't have been considered what traditional was at the time. And the adjudicator, Nora Butler, who was an amazing, like stunning traditional Irish singer, really set like the tone for so many people in terms of style. But she slated me. I think I was 11 and she just absolutely tore into me. I was like, oh my God. But she put me second, but she absolutely ripped me to shreds. She was like, your voice is lovely, the song's horrible, like in front, and it was in a church, and I just have a distinct memory of her voice just echoing through the church. No. And I thought after that, I was like, God, I can never do this again. This is not happening. But basically then Catherine got Nora to come and give me some lessons. I was absolutely terrified of the woman at the time, just because I thought she like hated me basically as a child. But so I went to her for a few lessons, and just kind of fell in love with singing and like learning about the songs. And I was very lucky when I was younger to have had a few different teachers who like different styles and kind of brought different twists to things that really like solidified the style for me. And I fell in love with singing specifically. And I've kind of just been here ever since.
So Molly, I actually thought Anya McGeady was your singing teacher. Anya, of course, from Gwitcha, fantastic singer and fiddle player.
Yeah, she taught me. I think I was probably, because Izzy, my younger sister, basically went to bodhrán lessons with Colm, who's the bodhrán player in Gwitcha, and that's how I met Anya, and was the biggest fangirl of her when I was younger. I thought she was the coolest person, still do think she's the coolest
and
person.
Still is, exactly, yeah.
Like she's amazing, and she really set the tone for me in terms of like how versatile the style could be, because I think before going to her, I felt quite restricted in what I could do with songs. I was very lucky to have people who taught me songs so well and were like beautiful for like ornamentation and things like that. But in terms of storytelling and variation and being able to like bring yourself to the song, before going to Anya, I didn't really have that. Like it was mad because, you know, you go to classes to learn songs to play at the Fleadh, etc. So all the songs that I knew were just for competition until I was like 14. And then I went to Anya and she'd be like, why would we start learning songs for the Fleadh in October? It's not for like 10 months. So she'd give me like loads of beautiful songs to learn and to add variations to, and like really taught me how I could bring myself to a song, which was really special for me. And that kind of encouraged me to want to like pursue singing professionally. So she was a huge part of my kind of progression in that way.
It's amazing to hear your experiences like growing up in the Fleadh tradition, because like I don't know if I ever told you, Molly, but I never actually did any of the Fleadhs ever. You know?
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah, like it's such a weird thing because I don't know if any of you guys did any of the Fleadhs in the UK, but like it's such a like love-hate relationship, because when it's great, like when it's good, it's great group of Kyo, like being in a group and playing together and doing well, and like All Ireland Fleadhs and you know the culture and getting people together in that way is so special. But the pressure that you can be at the age of 10 to be in one of those competitions is insane. It's mad, and I think I'm very lucky that I met people like Anya, and also I had a teacher called Martin and things that like showed me how to enjoy the songs aside from competition, because although it's a great way to learn and to get feedback, it's not the end of the world, you know, with those things. And I'm glad I did them, but I'm also glad I started taking them less seriously as I got older, because they're just also, you know, it's style, it's what people prefer over other things. And
yeah, absolutely. I remember going to a Fleadh like a good few years ago and just sitting in with the bodhrán competition and just sort of you know, I sort of thought, oh well, these players are all fantastic, you know, and I kind of did my like version of like where I placed them, and none of them got placed, you know.
Yeah,
and
it's mad.
It's really you know, I mean, music competition is, I mean, that's a whole other podcast, Jenny.
Could do a whole podcast just on that.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's interesting. But it's really comes down to, you know, the Fleadh is like, you know, Cultus is really kind of one of their main missions, I suppose, is preserving the traditions. So when you're quite experimental, you're perhaps not, you know, don't fit quite that world so well, you know.
That was the thing. Yeah, when I was in the Fleadh and all, it was very much like songs or your song choice is beautiful, voice is beautiful, but it's a bit too modern would always be the comment that I got. And because I sing contemporary as well, I was like, I don't know what to do. I was existential crisis mode. But that's why when like meeting you guys and doing stuff like what we did, like with these two albums, is so special and reassuring, shall we say.
But that's such a thing with traditional music. There's this tightrope to be walked between keeping what was, which is a really important thing. So, you know, the tradition, it was sung like that, this is how it is. That's a really genuine, important thing. But also, and I go back to my grandpa for this, it's not about what was, it's about what you're doing and where you're taking it. So we've got to find in the scene overall a way of, you know, keeping things defined, and yeah, that's the tradition from this place here, and that's fantastic, but also the ability to take, this is the song and I'm taking it from where it is now and it just takes me here today. Or for me, some artists, you know, they change and they'll change something, that'll be always how they do it, but that's just as important, and it's a living tradition, which means as well as keeping the old stuff so we all know what it is, you can move somewhere else as well without, that's not either or, it should kind of be both, to me anyway.
It's kind of an interesting reflection on perhaps the last 100 years and the development of the ability to record the tradition, to be able to listen back to how somebody sang it in 1920 something. If you go further back, and we're just talking about a song from the 1600s, 10 years later, nobody remembered how it was done. There's no record other than you might get the words, you might get the melody. Even that's borderline sometimes. And you can see that when you look at broadsheets and so on, that the words and the music will change over time. Whereas now, because we've got the ability to record and freeze the performance, the danger is that we get into that trap of replication. So that, no, you can't do it like that. It should be done this way. Listen very carefully. That's the way it was done in 1920. You must recreate. And that, I think, is one of the danger signals that you always have to keep an eye on. As Adam said, it's important to understand where we've come from, and it's important to know the roots and the tradition and so on, but it shouldn't be a be-all and end-all. It should still allow us to develop it and to move it and create something fresh.
And I think that's even what's sort of happened with, classical music or Western art music, whatever you want to call it. It's that it kind of it got very set, and it got very sort of, this is the way it was, so this is the way it has to be again. And actually, a lot of that music there was much more of a degree of improvisation, or originally in that kind of music, and you listen to some of the really early recordings, and they really sort of open up to that spirit of improvisation, I guess. So I think we're dealing with a very similar thing in a way.
It's weird, though, actually, thinking about it, because one of the really important things in passing on tunes or songs was you'd take it from somebody or other, they would teach their version to the next person, and then to preserve that song, you needed to teach it to the next person in the same way. So this kind of living photocopy, if you like, was really important to keep it alive. Recording ought to make that, ought to do the opposite. You can say, wow, this is the living photocopy, let's record it now. Great, that's it. We all know what it is. And it's more free to develop or change without ever losing that kind of initial truth, if you like. So recording doesn't have to stick you in stone. It could free you up.
The previous guest said that to me, actually, that you can do what you like with the songs because those recordings of that source material still exist, that you can't take those away. So you're free to do whatever you like. It's kind of liberating in a way.
It could be, couldn't it?
Yeah, it's a nice way to look at it, actually.
I'm going to come around to the rest of you. Cormac, you talked about the flár. Was that a part of your route into traditional music as well?
Well, I met Tommy Hayes, actually, from Stockton's Wing, the bodhrán player, when I was quite young. I was about 12, I think. And he put a bodhrán in my hands for the very first time. And so I kind of got introduced to the bodhrán as a percussion instrument rather than a instrument of traditional Irish music, if you like, So that was kind of really interesting. So I never did the flár route in a way. I actually classically trained as it when I was young.
So what was it that brought you into traditional music?
Well, I suppose, I guess, I love classical music, and I went on to do a classical music degree actually in Manchester. So I actually moved from Waterford over to Manchester to do that. But I think I found a sense of freedom or something in trad music. There was when I was growing up, I was playing in a lot of bands, so playing a lot of sort of rock music, I guess, at the time. But I suppose when I started, and when I was young, my parents would take me to gigs. I remember the first ever gig I went to actually was Mary Black in the Forum in Waterford, and it was a fantastic gig. And the percussionist I remember was a guy called Noel Bridgman, who sadly passed away, I think, a few years ago. I never got to meet him. I would have loved to have met him in a professional capacity, if you like. But I was so struck by his playing because he had a sort of a standard drum kit, and he played it all with his hands, from what I remember. I can't remember the exact ins and outs of the kit. I was so young, I was probably like 7 or 8. But I was really struck by that, and how we could kind of get this kind of depth, but in this kind of acoustic way with Mary Black. And, so I went to a lot of gigs like that, and I suppose I fell in love with the folk music, and I had an after school club in primary school. So this is again when I'm like 7 or 8. I learned guitar and tin whistle, and, we used to learn a lot of folk songs from, a lot of the Irish repertoire, but a lot of stuff like Hugh McCall and, people like that as well. And Bob Dylan and, even into sort of singer-songwriter Irish kind of artists as well. And so I suppose for me, the route of the education route, I suppose, was classical music. So I was kind of growing up doing I didn't do the flas and the kilts thing, but I did all the grades, in percussion, in piano actually, and then kind of later in percussion. And, I played with this sort of Irish National Youth Orchestra and did those kind of things. And that was my the serious side, I suppose. And then for the fun, I was playing in bands. And, eventually I kind of found trad music and, started getting into, music from people like Donnery really inspired me. And, and I think I remember, I was playing in sessions and starting to learn the music that way as well, both instrumental trad music and sort of the song repertoire, But I started I think some of the most influential gigs that I went to, I remember when I saw Michael McGoldrick for the first time. It was Michael McGoldrick and Desi Donnelly on fiddle, and John Kelly on bodhrán, and Ed Boyd on guitar. And it was at Kilkenny Arts Festival, and it just blew my mind, it really did. I'd never seen trad music played in that way before. It was really a moment where I thought, like, okay, this is something really exciting and emergent almost, and it's really pushing the boundaries of what I knew to be trad music. And I think at the same time I was listening to bands like Keela, Ronan O'Snowdig, who I'm delighted to say is a good friend of mine now. We're working together on a project at the moment, but he's the singer and bodhrán player from Keela, and that band was just, they broke all the rules of trad. I remember even in school we studied trad for Leaving Cert, which is Leaving Cert's like your equivalent to your A levels, I suppose, in the UK. And Keela were listed in the curriculum, and they were listed under the title Trash Trad. And I always remember being really uncomfortable with that, because I was like, this is amazing, and they're fusing all these styles from all around the world, and it's incredible. And, so I've always been really inspired by that. And of course, Tommy Hayes, he was the first person to put the bodhrán in my hands. And he, of course, is so experimental in what he does, and his early albums like On Ross, which ended up one of the tracks from that, the title track, I think, ended up as the title music for In the Name of the Father movie with Bono, I think, collaborated with him on it in the end. So I've always sort of leaned into the more experimental side, I think, of music. And and then I suppose when I moved to Manchester and studied I studied at the Royal Northern College of Music, and the training there was primarily sort of classical percussion, orchestral percussion. And but the percussion department was fantastic, is fantastic still. And there was a great teacher who's still there, who was particularly influential on me in terms of the global percussion styles, and that was a fantastic player called Dave Hassel, and he sort of opened my world up to Latin percussion, so the Cuban and Brazilian repertoire, West African stuff, and then I suppose living in Manchester blew my mind really, from coming from Waterford, and suddenly you can find everything. It was like on one road. I remember going down Oxford Road in Manchester, and all the way out to sort of Rusholme, where you could find, I was going to gigs with, Bhangra sort of music and Indian classical music, and then going further out, and there was an amazing West African community, and I was sort of getting involved with their musical experiences, I suppose, and sessions and gigs, and, and then there was, lots of great Brazilian musicians around, and of course a great trad scene, so it was where Michael McGoldrick and Desi Donnelly and John Kelly and those were living. So I kind of, I got myself down to O'Shea's Irish Pub was my first experience there, and did a gig once a week. And I suppose really learned, that was the experience, I suppose, for me. I was about 18, where I really learned how to gig and how to play in a band, play trad, play the songs. We were doing all these songs. To be honest, we probably did most of the songs that are on this actual record, And from there, really, it's sort of I sort of took that direction into folk music and traditional music.
So huge, wide range of influences there from all across the world. But I'm getting the idea as well of a bit of an affinity for the Rebels. Is that right?
Do you think so? Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, maybe. I mean, I've always just I've always just loved experimental stuff, I suppose, and it's like the journey of it. It sounds kind of cheesy, but it is. It's like it's the journey of the music that most appeals to me. And I think with that comes the ethos of experimentation and collaboration with artists from all sorts of different cultures and traditions, So I don't see myself as a folk musician or a classical musician or whatever, I don't see the lines. I think that's kind of problematic sometimes, when you're trying to make music and people say, well, what is it? And you're like, oh, well, I don't know. I just found these amazing people and we did this stuff, So,
can I ask what your PhD is in?
Yes, it's in the bodhrán. It's in performance. It's a performance PhD. It's what they call arts practice. So it's a kind of a fairly emergent form of research where you use your own practice as research. So it's fantastic, actually. I'm able to sort of use my practice, use my experience, and that's a form of research. And I'm researching performance of the instrument and sort of what it's doing in the world. And I've been able to, I've done a fantastic series of interviews with some incredible, inspirational percussionists and bodhrán players. And I went back to do a major interview with Summerhayes, who, as I mentioned earlier, was the guy who first put the bodhrán in my hands. So yeah, it's kind of been an amazing experience. It's been 4 years now. I'm coming towards the end this year, fingers crossed. I'll hand it in. And I mean, it's been an interesting one because of the lockdowns and the pandemic. Live performance is normally a huge part of an arts practice PhD, and I wasn't able to do that, unfortunately. But I did, I kind of went into doing some films and doing some recordings and things. So it actually took a very unexpected turn in direction, and it's been amazing. But it's been very full on, So yeah.
Oh, the summertime has come, and the trees are sweetly blooming, and the wild mountain thyme grows around the blooming heather. Will you go, lassie, go? And we'll all go together to Wild Mountain Thyme, all around the blooming heather. Oh, will you go?
My journey was probably started with folk, then went away from folk and came back. So one of the things that has defined my musical journey really was my choice of instrument. I mean, obviously that's for everybody, but the accordion specifically has one or two issues that defines where I went. So when you think of the accordion, it's hard sometimes to know what form of music you're going to come up with. And the first area perhaps people think of would be the sort of Scottish Jimmy Shand sort of style. And that's where I started. My parents met through Scottish country dance music. So I must have been exposed to fiddle and accordion bands from a very early age. I can't actually remember. And so when my father asked what instrument I would like to play, I'd been doing the piano for a bit, and he said, okay, you're showing your enthusiasm. Would you like to play something else? Here's the list. And he'd written down every instrument he could think of. I narrowed it down to the bagpipes or the accordion. So from a very early age, I'm sure everyone will agree, was rather a strange person. And then you have to find a teacher. So I ended up playing the accordion with a lovely lady, but it was very much in your sort of 1930s cabaret sort of style, which, as you can imagine, growing up as a well, I'd have been 8 when I started, so sort of from 8 to 12 doing that sort of repertoire. It was enjoyable in one sense, and yet also not something you would ever want to admit to anybody, really. And so there's this, it started in a folk scene, but then I rapidly moved away from it. And I found classical music. I came across a programme on BBC Radio 4, but hosted by Mogens Ellegaard, the Danish innovator of classical accordion. And off I went off on that route. And for the next 15 years or so, did the entire classical thing. So I went off to Royal Academy of Music, did a music degree, and I'm working in the extremities of classical music, because when you're playing an unusual instrument, you often are ending up doing the more contemporary repertoire, or squeaky gate as you might call it. And that took me down a very curious route, and I don't regret it at all. It did my technique the world of good, and really opens up to you what your instrument can do to achieve all these unusual sounds. But it wasn't really satisfying, to work for months on a piece and go and play it at a concert to 20 people and not even really be certain you liked it yourself isn't a very satisfying place to be. And then I moved back to my hometown of Manchester and needed to earn a living, and I was teaching. I was lucky enough to get the job as the accordion teacher at the Cheetham School of Music in Manchester, and I ran an open day to try and drum up some more pupils, and I met just basically an amateur youth group who were doing folk music, and they said, I know you're doing classical stuff, but would you be willing to come along and teach our children? And that basically was the start of it. And so there I am, and I found a bunch of people who like to play together, and we're playing tunes, and it's quite a nice little tune, that, and what could I do with it? And before you know it, your head's just rushed off somewhere, and you're listening, and you're grabbing CDs, and you're going to gigs, and you're meeting other accordionists who are doing things their way. And I think that was the exciting thing for me, was to find lots of people playing the same instrument as me, and every single one of them was different. And you learnt something from each one, and that was an exciting few years of just absorbing all these different styles. It might be, Karen Tweed doing sort of a more of an Irish style, and then I'd meet somebody from Finland and learn their style, and then you go further abroad. And it just was such an exciting journey, those early sort of developmental stages for me as I came out of classical. And it probably hasn't really stopped yet, I don't think. Just maybe perhaps not quite as rapid as it was then.
I think there is just that endless creativity potential, isn't there, within traditional music?
Yes, I don't think you could ever claim that you've heard all styles. You're always finding something else to dip into and to absorb, and to take something on board for yourself, and that is just what makes it all so exciting.
That's fantastic. And Adam, you've got a classical background as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I've got a classical background. It's probably not quite what I started with. A bit like Murray, I heard trad stuff first of all. Grandpa played that kind of thing. And for some reason, the first music that I really remember loving, my parents, neither of them play anything, but there was a lot of tape recordings, and a lot of it was folk music. And I was a poor sleeper in those days, as I probably still am. And I was sent to bed every night with a little tape machine, and I was meant to listen to music until I fell asleep, which was actually a mistake, I might now add. I hope my parents aren't listening, because I just listened to it until it finished, and then I put it on again. So folk music was always very deeply in me. But a bit like Core, I didn't then, and I still don't, I don't think, understand the boundaries between different kinds of music. What I love is playing the violin. What I love is the sound of the violin and what you can do with it. Folk music for me is just one of those things. Somehow the system in this country, there are no flowers that I know of. And I imagine there are, maybe in Scotland more, there are competitions, but I don't remember anything for trad music at all that I knew of where I was in Leicestershire. So it was never a thing that you would take as a kind of learning process. There wasn't, let's do this next competition, let's do the next one. I remember doing things like that, but they were all I have actually no recollection of what they were really, but it was all classical music. Learning the violin was, okay, I'm going to have violin lessons. Well, then you learn this, and then you learn this, and they're all pieces of classical music. So in a way, by default, I ended up just witlessly following that line of classical music. I then went off to music college, and it's not that I absolutely love classical music. Some fantastic things. I wouldn't regret what I've done at all. I've toured the world endlessly doing concertos and chamber music performances in some amazing places. It's been fantastic. But in a way, it doesn't... Maybe I could say it a different way. Whenever I pick up a violin and I'm not thinking, what I play, as soon as there's a violin under my chin, I automatically play. And what I play is folk music, or my versions of folk music, or something that starts with folk music and then dribbles off into some kind of endless exploration of whatever's in my mind. Folk music's always been there. It's the thing that really satisfies me in a different way. It's fantastic to play the Beethoven Violin Concerto, but it's always the Beethoven Violin Concerto. Whereas for me, a kind of folk music beginning can lead to, as Cormac said, I think, that this kind of ultimate mindfulness. I'm there now, in that moment, playing the thing that I'm creating in that moment. Essentially, just for myself, expressing, not even consciously, what's going on in my head musically. It's a thing that it creates something. It's not that I have a process in my mind which has to be satisfied by creating this music. This music almost creates itself, and you're listening to it yourself as you create it. It has an effect on you. It's a thing. So that's what folk music has been for me. And after many years of really only performing on classical stages, I found a way to play what I've always played for my own pleasure, if you like, with other people in a more public way.
It's soul music, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I think so for me.
And I have to ask you, Adam, what was on those tapes that you listened to when you were a child?
Well, most of it, I actually don't know what it was, because I never asked at the time. They were unlabelled. It was all sorts of things. I discovered recently that some of it that I've always loved was the Spinners, who were a Liverpool band. Yeah. They actually made it into the charts, I think. Some would be Joan Baez, I think I remember. And some of it was just, I don't know, there's a Scottish group called the Corries, who I don't think are around anymore.
Oh, they were.
It was not really a very large group, it was a duo. But that was
amazing,
yeah, I loved their stuff.
Some amazing bodhrán stuff, actually, with the Corries, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just some other stuff. I never knew what it was. I absolutely loved it. There's one particular thing I've been trying to find ever since. I haven't got the tape anymore. Can't quite remember it, and have never found it.
Oh, the mystery song, or the mystery tune.
Tune, yeah.
That's great. So unspecified folk music. I think it's just really interesting how, three of you are from that classical background, because when I first listened to Wild Rover, my first instinct was, I'm getting a vibe of Benjamin Britten's Sea Interludes. So that was where my head went first of all.
Fantastic.
And then it just kind of, it was obviously, part of the tradition and so on. And but I did get that little vibe from it as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think a bit like, I think maybe both Mary and Cor said, the trad stuff for me is, it's kind of me. It's the main thing, if you like. But it's, without having done the classical things I've done, I wouldn't be able to actually access a lot of the way it feels to me.
Yeah.
I think that's what, that's what that training, I think, is really good for. It's you really get to know your instrument, get to know how to, I suppose, be expressive and emotive, and have a kind of a, you do a lot of years, very intense work on technique, and and then you can use that and harness that for other music later on. So it kind of plays into I suppose as a folk musician, if you'd like to call yourself that, those skills are really invaluable, I suppose, in how you approach it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it makes you superior to somebody who hasn't had that. But the thing it does give for me is the ability, like I said, to access the way I feel about it, or not feel about it in some kind of intellectual way, but the feelings it provokes in me as I'm playing, I can realise instantly on the instrument in a way that I know I wouldn't be able to without that, which just means that I provide something, or what I do is different to what it would have been if I hadn't done it, which for me is a good thing. It doesn't make it actually good overall.
Indeed, yeah, but it's no substitute for like experience of the music. And I think the thing with folk music is you've got to live it in a way to understand it, and it's all those late night sessions in pubs, and you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's all those hours and hours that we've spent like just unwittingly or unknowingly sort of learning that music.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, for me, it's kind of the music that burbles away in the back of my mind all the time. It's what music is. It's a thing that's at the root of life, if you like.
Absolutely. And I think what the training allows us to do, I mean, you've said it before, Adam, it gives you the ability to play whatever is in your head, that it takes away any form of barrier, so that the instrument has actually become another limb. I certainly know when I put my accordion on that I'm not thinking so much about what fingering I should be using or where the bellow should be or what this. It just becomes as instinctive as walking along, and so therefore, when you are reacting to your emotions, your thoughts, your memories of that tune you heard in the pub 3 nights ago, it just comes out because your new limb, is just doing whatever your body is asked of it.
It's interesting, though. Maybe that's not a thing that automatically comes with the training, because I know an awful lot of classical musicians who somehow, because of the training, are only able to play the dots on the page, which is definitely not what we do.
Maybe it's the late night pubs then. Not maybe.
No, because I think it's the same. Yeah, it's just, you're just fabulous musicians, I guess. It's just like,
we'll pay you later, don't worry.
Because for trad musicians, there's so many people who feel like the same way, and in reverse, that it feels like that same intensity towards an instrument and being able to do whatever you want. But I do agree that, like Murray, like you were saying, I think a lot of that comes from just the constant sessions and late night music, and in a way, although it's enjoyment and you're there to learn and enjoy, it really pushes you to be able to like play to your full potential when you're in that intense setting with a group of people.
I think it's when you're with the right people. I don't mean that in too hostile a way, but certainly when you play in one of those, I can remember sessions where I've played with some, maybe people you don't know, but it just, something is right, and there's some form of energy in the room, where it does, as you say, it not only, I don't think it even gives you your full potential, it kind of gives you more than your potential. You suddenly find yourself swept along by that energy in the room, by all these other amazing musicians.
Yeah, that's a big thing. And it can
just really take you, and so that the whole becomes much bigger than the parts. There's not many sessions that achieve that, but there are some. It has happened, definitely.
It's wonderful to hear you talk about these things. I absolutely love listening to musicians talk about the music they make, and this is very much podcast for other people who like that as well. I do hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation with the guys, and do give their new album a listen. It's well worth it. Remember, you can subscribe to Handed Down on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, any podcast platform that you use. You should be able to subscribe, and then you'll never miss an episode. And do rate and review us as well, and tell other people about the podcast if you like it. It'll help us to keep on supporting traditional music like we do. We're back very soon with a May special, but until then, goodbye.